Greetings, this is Danny Haiphong, and you are tuning in to a reading of one of my published articles, this time in my Substack, Chronicles of Haiphong.substack.com, and it was republished in the Black Agenda Report. The original article was put up on January 28th, 2022, and it is titled Casual Racism and the New Cold War. So it begins. A quick Google search of quote-unquote Russia or quote-unquote China is all that is needed to identify the casual racism of the corporate media and its central role in the US's new Cold War. Add the word fear to the search and the agenda becomes even clearer. In a search for mainstream media articles conducted by me about Russia on January 26th, 9 of the first 10 articles that appeared contained the word fear in the headline. China fared a bit better than Russia, but not by much. Better than half of the headlines referenced the word fear or worried to describe the affairs relating to the world's second largest economy. What is the corporate media afraid of? With regard to Russia, the fear stems from a rumor spread by the U.S. military intelligence apparatus that the Russian Federation will invade Ukraine at some point in the very near future. Russia is amassing its military on the Russia-Ukraine border and spreading fear into both Ukrainian families and global markets alike. According to the corporate media, the U.S. is the white knight in this scenario. Joe Biden has acted upon the U.S.'s self-anointed savior role by placing thousands of troops on high alert, threatening sanctions against Russia, and working with its European allies to ensure that Russia cannot weaponize its energy supply. Recent mainstream media fear-mongering over China has centered largely on its COVID-19 response. On January 13th, the New York Times compared health workers in the Chinese city of Xi'an to Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi architect of the Holocaust. A few weeks later, a Times opinion column opined that China's zero COVID policy was a pandemic waiting to happen because the economy and society will eventually lose the battle to prevent the spread of the virus. The concern, of course, is not for the Chinese people, but for supply chains. Several reports over the last 2 weeks confirm that U.S. and European corporations actually fear that China's COVID-19 response will send ripple effects across the global economy. Casual racism does not manifest as outward expression of hatred toward the quote-unquote other. Rather, the targets of casual racism are dehumanized by other means. Fear is the most widely used weapon in the arsenal of the new Cold War. Russia and China are feared for both their incompetence and their mystical powers to subvert and dominate. Both nations are enacting plans to take over the world, so we are told, and making the world an even more dangerous place. Censorship, repression, war, and economic crisis are all that China and Russia have to offer the world. Again, so we are told. Manufactured fear of Russia and China is an effective generator of support for the new Cold War from across the political spectrum. Casual racism comforts crass racists as well as the liberal do-gooders who find solace in projecting the crimes of their government onto a perceived adversary. A massive dip in U.S. public opinion toward Russia and China has provided ample political room for new Cold Warriors in the ruling class to justify their dangerous provocations. Casual racism is the ammunition that buries the truth at the bottom of an endless sea of propaganda. So buried has the truth become under the new Cold War regime that casual racism has replaced it altogether in mainstream discourse. Casual racism is a catalyst for the Red Scare 2.0, a set of mythologies that cause Americans and Westerners to see things that simply are not there. Russiagate, for example, induced a permanent state of paranoia in the liberal class that Russia hacked its way into the U.S. election to empower alt-right forces of the Trump variety. China has been accused of stealing intellectual property from the U.S., Despite being the despite being the unquestioned leader in patents and high technology in the world, acting aggressively in the South China Sea, and even covering up its COVID-19 numbers. The Economist went so far as to allege that 1.7 million people have died of COVID-19 in China based on quote-unquote excess death estimates that fail to take into account the variation between China and the US's COVID-19 policies. China's COVID-19 data is just automatically tagged as unreliable and the Chinese government inherently untrustworthy. Seeing Chinese and Russian wrongdoing where none exists not only justifies U.S. warmongering, but also erases the truth about China and Russia's role in the world. NATO has been encroaching on Russia's border for decades through the admission of several post-Soviet states. It was the U.S. that sponsored the overthrow of Ukraine in 2014, a regime change operation that empowered neo-Nazi forces. Even then, new Cold War propagandists were clamoring over Russia's supposed quote-unquote takeover of Crimea after the Russian-speaking population in that region voted to join the Russian Federation for fear of being ethnically cleansed in the aftermath of the 2014 coup in Ukraine. Russia's military response to NATO provocations should thus be seen as an act of self-defense from hostile foreign powers. The demands presented by Russia to the U.S. in the current Ukrainian crisis was nothing more than a list of concrete steps that both sides could take to respect international law. These demands included a pause on NATO expansion and the placement of U.S. military bases and weaponry in post-Soviet countries. The U.S. categorically dismissed Russia's suggestions. The U.S. sees itself as international law, yet it is Russia that is being made the object of fear by the mainstream press. The cognitive dissonance surrounding China is arguably larger in scale. China's zero-COVID dynamic policy has been the most effective worldwide, saving at least 900,000 lives and keeping the current death toll in China to under 5,000 for a nation of 1.4 billion people. China was the only major economy to finish 2020 with positive GDP growth. Daily life and governance in China essentially returned to normal when the lockdown in Wuhan was lifted in April of 2020. Since then, China has eliminated extreme poverty, deepened its commitment to curb climate change, and provided billions of vaccines and other forms of solidarity to the global south. The recent lockdown in Xi'an, while not without significant error, succeeded in preventing the spread of COVID-19 throughout the country. The American empire employs casual racism in pursuit of its imperialist objectives. One of these objectives is the maintenance and expansion of global hegemony. Red Scare mythology justifies expansion as provocations and dehumanizes the targets of war. Casual racism toward new Cold War adversaries also impedes the political development of the masses within the warmongering states. The demonization of Russia and China stifles the potential for a mass movement to emerge in the U.S. and West that is capable of demanding a genuine COVID-19 policy of containment or a peaceful and fair settlement to the Ukraine situation, which respects Russia's sovereignty. In other words, casual racism is a ball and chain on the development of a truly left movement in the places where it's needed the most. A heavy smog of American exceptionalism has polluted the political atmosphere. Institutional neglect has become normalized. A cloud of suspicion hangs over China's achievements and Russia's positive role in world affairs. That cloud is attached to an oncoming storm of global confrontation and war which holds consequences so catastrophic that they are best described as unthinkable. It is thus the duty of revolutionaries and quote-unquote progressives to build a movement for genuine peace that openly counters the casual racism and Red Scare mythologies at the ideological foundations of the U.S.'s new Cold War. You have been listening to a published article of mine, this time in my Substack on January 26th, entitled Casual Racism and the New Cold War. It was republished in the Black Agenda Report's most recent issue. Please do support my work if you're able at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. You can also support me annually at chroniclesofhaiphong.substack.com or subscribe to the newsletter for free.